On August 15, 423, the Western imperial throne was left vacant by Honorius' death. Several months passed without an emperor, as Constantinople and Ravenna were unable to reach an agreement. In November, some important men elected Joannes as their emperor. Theodosius, who had a legitimate candidate at his court, the young Valentinian, considered this a usurpation and prepared for civil war. Joannes had in his ranks a very capable man, Aetius, who lived parts of his early life as a hostage inside the Hunnic realm. He was sent east to gather mercenaries for the coming clash, using his relations with the nomads to do so. In Constantinople, Valentinian III was delivered the title of Caesar. Ardabur and his son Aspar were to lead the army. The duo was successful in its advance in Italy. Joannes was captured and killed. Valentinian became Augustus and was, for now, under the regency of his mother Galla. Aetius returned with Hunnic mercenaries too late. Since he had a powerful army with him, he negotiated with the new imperial court. They gave him the title of Magister Militum, which he used to operate militarily in Gaul. His first action in the region was to break the Visigothic siege of Ars and push them back to Aquitaine. The next target were the Salian Franks, who were now inside imperial borders and against which Aetius fought multiple times. Later, he also restored order in the province of Raetia. While this was happening, in Africa, the local commander Bonifacius, despite having supported Valentinian during the civil war, started a conflict against the central government in Italy. In this context, the Vandals, led by their king Gaiseric, managed to reach the North African lands and, marching east, they defeated and besieged the African commander. An eastern army under Aspar arrived, but did not manage to solve the situation. Having lost the battle for Africa, Bonifacius fled by sea. Once he reached Italy, he had to fight in a new civil war. Mistrust between the different power figures in Galla Placidia, Aetius, Bonifacius, and another man named Flavius Felix led to the assassination of the latter, evidently by Aetius. This triggered an open conflict. At Rimini, Aetius was defeated but fatally wounded his enemy. The man fled in disgrace for a time, but soon returned with Huns and managed to get his powers restored by Galla. Aetius' control over the empire, with no real rivals anymore, was now immense, and he used it to continue his military activities. One day in Constantinople, the new patriarch, Nestorius, was debating theology. At some point, he declared that the divine nature of Christ was clearly distinct from its human nature. By deduction, the Virgin Mary could not be called Mother of God, Theotokos in Greek, but only Mother of Christ, Christokos. Of course, this caused intense clashes among the many bishops of the empire. Cyril of Alexandria and many other of his supporters heavily criticized Nestorius' ideas. The emperor attempted to solve the dispute by convening an ecumenical council at Ephesus. This council was chaotic, with Cyril famously trying to start the debates before every Nestorian supporter had arrived. Theological clashes continued, while both sides tried to get the other excommunicated. They played politics to get the emperor's approval. In the end, Cyril succeeded, and Nestorius was exiled in Egypt. His branch of Christianity, Nestorianism, would survive and expand throughout Asia well into the Middle Ages. Rua, the influential Hunnic leader for the last years, died, and he was succeeded by the two brothers, Bleda and Attila. The duo told Constantinople to send back Hunnic fugitives. Along with that, they imposed a 700 pounds of gold annual tribute to Theodosius. The emperor had paid half of that amount before and accepted this new treaty, believing that this was always cheaper than an all-out war with the nomads. As Aspar went back to Constantinople, leaving the Vandals behind, a peace treaty was signed with them. They were allowed to take control of Numidia and Mauritania. The Huns, meanwhile, obtained imperial authorization to take over Pannonia. This plain territory was especially good for the nomadic horses of the Huns, and thus became the center of Hunnic power. Those events allowed Aetius to resume his operations in Gaul. Once again, he fought and limited Visigothic expansion. During those military campaigns, Aetius and other Roman commanders would often impose the foederati status on the different tribes they fought. Germanic leaders would, however, break this status on a regular basis, forcing the Romans to constantly fight them in order to keep a stable balance of power. When the Burgundians did that, Aetius answered with brutality, attacking their kingdom alongside Hunnic troops, defeating his foe and massacring many Burgundians. The few survivors were resettled further south. Fleeing the Germanic invaders which arrived in Britannia, some Romano-Britons left the island for Armorica and freed themselves from both imperial power and barbarian invaders. Aetius settled some islands not far from their territory to put them in check. Conflict continued with the Franks as they switched from alliance to hostility every few years. In Hispania, local Roman commanders tried to contain the gradual Suebian expansion as much as possible, but the severe lack of resources weakened Roman resistance. When Valentinian III reached majority, he went to Constantinople to celebrate his marriage with Theodosius' daughter, Licinia Eudoxia. This was a reaffirmation of imperial unity. Eastern officials had also completed a new, unified and coherent legal document after many years, the Theodosian Code. This text was officially adopted by both sides of the empire. Sirmium was given to Theodosius. This meeting was to be the last time both Western and Eastern emperors met in person. Pulcheria and Eudocia, both sister and wife of Theodosius, were often at odds. This eventually led Eudocia to exile herself to Jerusalem. She lived in this city for the rest of her life. As with the other barbarians, it was only a matter of time for the Vandals to break the peace. In 439, they conquered the crucial city of Carthage, continuing their attacks on the island of Sicily. This was terrible news for the Romans. Unlike Gaul, Hispania, or even Britannia, Africa was vital, as its food surplus was able to feed the large urban centers of Italy, Rome being the most important of them. And with their newly acquired fleet, the Vandals became a real threat. After a conflict with Persia, the Shah having limited his operations in raiding the frontier provinces, Theodosius prepared a large expedition to recapture Roman Africa in conjunction with the West. The Huns, taking advantage of this, crossed the Danube. They advanced rapidly, storming several fortified cities with great speed. Theodosius understood that the opportunistic Huns were too much to deal with for the outmatched armies deployed in the Balkans. He recalled his fleet and the soldiers that went with it. Thus, the Western Romans had to recognize Vandalic dominion over Africa. At some point, Bleda met his end, and this made Attila king of the entire Hunnic realm. His empire showed its power when the Balkans suffered once again a massive invasion. During the costly battle of the Aetius, an eastern field army was wiped out. The Huns were then free to pillage from the Danube to Greece. Even worse for the Romans, the Theodosian walls had been partially destroyed by an earthquake. However, they managed to repair them in time. Facing such massive fortifications, Attila did not take the risk and turned back, requesting a large sum of gold and tripling the annual tribute Theodosius had to pay. Also part of the treaty, the Danube border was to be completely demilitarized. Religious division was the trend of the era. A certain Aetius started spreading another theology about the nature of Christ. Years earlier, Nestorius separated the two natures into two disconnected parts. This was condemned at Ephesus in 431. But now, following Aetius, many Christians went to the opposite direction and believed that the divine nature absorbed the human one, forming a single entity. Monophysitism was born. Of course, it once again threatened church unity. This time, Cyril's successor in Alexandria, Dioscorus, supported this idea. Saying that high religious figures restarted their internal wars, a second council was convened at Ephesus. Once again, unfairness was the order of the day. When anti-Monophysite Western bishops were refused entry, Pope Leo qualified the event of robber council, and many were left unsatisfied. By now, the emperor was dead. His sister, Pulcheria, made a political arrangement and married Marcian, who thus became emperor. This man did not waste time and declared a new council near the capital in Chalcedon. At this council were around 350 bishops. This time, the result was decisive. Monophysitism was declared heretical and the two natures of Christ were confirmed. The council clarified the official doctrine, but it started a large-scale schism with many segments of the population. As Eastern Emperor, Marcian restarted filling the treasury with new economic policies, refused to intervene in an Armenian revolt against Sassanid rule to avoid an open conflict, and, more crucially, ended the annual tribute to Attila. Inside the imperial family, Honoria, sister of Valentinian, was to be married to a senator. Not wanting this union, she wrote to Attila asking for help. With the letter, she sent her ring, as there was not much left to loot in the Balkans. And Marcian showed himself defiant. The Hunnic king used the letter of Honoria as a justification to attack the West. Aetius, having used the Hunnic mercenaries a lot during his campaigns, found himself deprived of his main weapon to face the invaders. He seriously needed allies. The Goths were the most powerful entity in Gaul, and despite the recent animosity with Aetius, Theodoric was eventually convinced to join his old enemy against Attila. As the Huns ravaged northern Gaul with little opposition, Aetius gathered as many allies as he could. The two armies were about to meet near Aurelianum, but the Huns withdrew, seeking a better battlefield. The undecided Alans joined the Romans, and the coalition pursued the Huns. A detachment of Gepids was sent to slow Aetius down, and was defeated. Attila stopped his army and faced his foe at the Catalaunian plains. The Hunnic army regrouped many peoples inhabiting the lands beyond Rhine and the Danube. Among them were the Gepids, Ostrogoths, Alemanni, and Franks. The Roman coalition contained some imperial troops and many other allies, the most prominent of which were the Visigoths, Alans, Burgundians, Saxons, and some Franks as well. On the Roman right flank was a strategic high ground, and both sides fought over it. The real battle started when the Huns launched a central attack and used their mounted archers to weaken the coalition's line. After that, the entire Hunnic army moved forward. The central strike was so brutal that parts of the Alan cavalry routed. Aetius mobilized his reserve to stabilize the line. On the Gothic side, King Theodoric fell, which made the Visigoths fight with even more determination. At some point in the day, Gothic cavalry on the heights, led by Theodoric's son, took full control of the area and charged down the hill. With the Visigothic flanking, the wavering Roman coalition regained momentum. As the sun was setting, Attila, in such a terrible tactical situation, decided to retreat. The remaining clashes taking place in the dark became confused and eventually stopped. To make this victory complete, the coalition forces had to resume the fight the very next morning to prevent a Hunnic escape. Seemingly, Aetius did not want this. Crushing the Huns was arguably not in his best interests. He convinced his allies not to push on. Only tied together by the common enemy, the coalition dissolved soon after. Attila had been expelled from Gaul, but he was far from finished. Showing his resolve, he entered Italy, sacking many cities in the north, including Aquileia. He then rushed to Rome, where the imperial family resided. Before he could reach the Eternal City, the Pope, Leo, went to meet this fearsome leader. Leo's eloquence, supply problems, disease inside the Hunnic army, and Marcian's military activities forced Attila to leave Rome untouched. Back in Pannonia, Attila celebrated his marriage and, after a grand feast, suddenly died. Shaken by the death of such a king, the Hunnic Empire faced severe internal conflicts, dismantling itself during the following years. Aetius was de facto leader of the Western Empire, but his relations with the imperial family had always been fragile. With Galla Placidia dead when both Aetius and Valentinian met in person, the emperor murdered his general, a death very much like the one of Stilicho decades ago. This was a mistake for Valentinian. The emperor was later killed by men loyal to Aetius. Taking advantage of the power vacuum, Petronius Maximus became Augustus. As Valentinian was now gone, the somewhat peaceful relation with Gaiseric immediately broke down. Now, the Vandals set sail to Italy. Panicked, Rome's inhabitants murdered Petronius Maximus, but this would not save the city. In June 455, Gaiseric and his men sacked the Eternal City. After Alaric, the unbelievable was committed for a second time, a generation later. The Vandals captured valuable riches as well as many members of Valentinian's family. With the Theodosian line nearly over, stable rule ended in the west. Aetius and Attila were dead, meaning the balance maintained with the different tribes inside the empire disappeared. The barbarians were now free to fall on the remaining imperial territories. While 30 years earlier, the Romans were still confident that they could restore their power. Now, despite the end of the Hunnic state, resources were lower than ever, and with political turmoil looming in the horizon, the future was not promising. The next decades would introduce the last attempts of revival by the Western emperors.